Today is the first day of Black History Month. All month long, CBS News New York will report on the history, culture, and achievements of African Americans. Black history is American history, or our collective story, but told through a different lens. The National Museum of African American History and Culture is the only national museum dedicated to the documentation of African American history and life. Located in Washington, D.C., it is the 19th museum of the Smithsonian Institution. The museum has collected more than 40,000 artifacts to date. Dr. Damian L. Thomas is a curator with the museum. He joins us now by Zoom. Good morning, Dr. Thomas.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Let's talk about why the celebration of Black History Month is still so important nearly 50 years after it was established.
It's important because we have to think about history from multiple perspectives to see new ways and interesting ways to engage with the topics of our day, with the issues that we are still confronting as a country, and the African American perspective is an important one to consider.
Doctor, how did Black History Month get started?
Black History Month started as Black History Week. It was founded by Carter G. Woodson in 1926. And he chose a week in February because it also encapsulated the birthdays of Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass, which were 2 days that African Americans had been celebrating going back to the 19th century. And so for 50 years, it was a week-long celebration. And then in 1976, as the nation was celebrating its 200-year anniversary, people decided that this week-long celebration should encompass the entire month of February.
How far back can we trace African American history in New York? Who were the first Black New Yorkers?
We can trace African American history in New York all the way back to the period of enslavement. Many people don't realize that by 1700, New York had more enslaved people than any of the other colonies. Most of the enslaved people in New York worked as domestics and maids and butlers. Some of them also worked on the dock unloading ships. New York abolished slavery in 1827, which was in many ways quite late for some of the northern states who had already taken that step, including places like Massachusetts.
Now, this year's theme is Black resistance. What can you tell us about that?
Black resistance doesn't just mean violent resistance. It just doesn't mean that people are marching and fighting, although those are core components and we have to think about them. But we also have to think about the other ways that resistance shows up in American history. African Americans resisting stereotypes, African Americans resisting lack of opportunity. So resistance is a way through which we can understand not only people taking direct action, but also ideologically challenging belief systems as well.
Doctor, the museum has only been collecting for 15 years. How much more history needs to be uncovered?
There are so many more stories that we have to tell. One of the great joys of my job is I've studied this for almost 30 years, but you're still learning more as people come to the museum with different objects and different vantage points through which we can share this history. So it's an ongoing process to do two things. Number one, I have to collect around the exhibitions as they exist today. But we also have to think about the curators of the future. What will the curators 50 years from now wish we had collected? So we have to do it from two distinct vantage points.
That's so interesting to think so far ahead. Curator Dr. Damian L. Thomas, curator from the National Museum of African American History and Culture, thank you so much for being with us this morning.
My pleasure.
We'll be right back.